Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Dalessio. I am a Rubyist. You may know me as Flavor Jones on the internet. And I am on a team at Shopify called the Ruby and Rails Infrastructure Team. And we are focused on making Rails work at scale, or Rails work better at scale. And by transitive property, we need to make Ruby work well. I'm going to spend like 2 minutes at the start of this in case people don't know anything about Shopify, to introduce you to what we do and maybe some of the interesting Ruby and Rails projects that we are investing in right now that you can ask us questions about. So hopefully that way we'll get a really healthy conversation going over the next hour. First, let me give you just a picture of Shopify's scale. These are some, I think what they call these vanity numbers. We've got a Ruby monolith, a Rails monolith that's creeping up on 3 million lines of code. 500,000 plus lifetime commits to this over 10 plus years. Our average every day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, is around 80,000 requests a minute. Peak requests are around 170,000 requests a minute. The platform we run on is really big. We have 200 Kubernetes clusters. We're running 2 billion, that's billion with a B, background jobs a day. Our database tier is handling 2 million requests a second, 240,000 writes a second. And our storefronts that are our merchants, our customers are running their stores on our software. When they run flash sales, we have gotten to 2.5 million requests per minute for a single store, and over 6,000 checkouts per minute for a single product in a store. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're running at scale on top of Rails for all of our customers worldwide. The big thing I want you to take away is that at Shopify, we think like speed is actually a feature. So we're investing in speed. We think scale is a feature. Being able to run this stuff broadly is a feature that we invest in. Less snappier, but just as important. Keeping the code base healthy and easy to work in so we can ship quickly and predictably forever is a feature. And so we're also investing in things like, what does incremental architecture look like on top of Rails? And what does it mean to keep a healthy and clean Rails code base? So those are some of the things that we're thinking about here on our team, which is the Ruby and Rails infrastructure team. So we have a bunch of people here today that you can pepper us with questions over the next hour. Some of the projects we're working on specifically are focused on runtime performance. We are working with Oracle on Truffle Ruby, led by Chris Seaton, who's here today. And this is focused on improving Truffle Ruby's performance and aspiring to be able to run Rails apps in production on it. Truffle Ruby is a completely different Ruby technology other than MRI. It's based on GraalVM and allows us to get some really eye-popping runtime numbers in almost real-world benchmarks. So we're very excited about the prospects of Truffle Ruby. Another performance-related project we're working on is YJIT, led by Maxime. This is a JIT that's being built into MRI based on basic block versioning. She's given a couple of talks about this, as well as there's going to be a blog post published in the next couple of days about this, so keep your eyes open for that. Matt and Peter gave a talk just now about variable width object allocation. Please go check it out. It's a wonderful talk, and it's a really complicated technical project that we think is going to have long-term performance benefits for MRI. Shopify is really interested in getting better async support in Rails too. So Jean Boussier, who's here today, you can ask him questions about this. He's added async support into active record relations. So this enables things like doing concurrent preloads in your controller. And we've started playing with that in our production apps too. So maybe Sean can answer some questions there. And we're just generally investing more in how do we get async patterns more accessible in Ruby so people aren't reaching for other tools like Node or Go. We're also investing in developer productivity. So we are working with Stripe. We have a team that has worked over the last year to add Rails support to Sorbet. We have type coverage up to 86% of our code base. That might be higher now. Ufuk is here today, and he can answer questions about Sorbet. And we're also integrating Sorbet type information into all of our developer IDEs to help people find errors before they check in their code. Because the tighter the feedback loops are, the better our velocity is as a team. Another interesting project is Rails maintenance tasks. Adriana and Etienne have been working on this, and this is essentially extending, Rails schema migrations to how do we run database maintenance? How do we actually change the data in our database in a way that's idempotent? We can run it incrementally. We can do it across a really complex deployment. We have database sharding across all of our 200 Kubernetes deployments. So it's non-trivial to be able to run these database maintenance tasks, and they're doing a fantastic job of extending Rails to support that. And finally, we have a team that's working on reducing complexity in our code base. This ends up being a lot of smaller projects in duration. But one interesting one, Volmer is going to be releasing Upgrow soon. Some of you may have seen this on the Hacker News or Reddit a couple of months ago. But basically, this is incremental application architecture, similar to what you might see in DryRB or Hanami. Like, what does it look like for us to make it a little bit easier to structure complex applications on top of Rails? This is what Upgrow is about. And we released Pacwork last year, which is helps define component boundaries inside of a Rails app. We're working with Gusto on this now, and helps developers be more aware of what their component boundaries are when they're breaking expectations. And what levels of cohesion and coupling do we have between our components in the code base? So that's just a snapshot of some of the things that the Ruby and Rails infrastructure team at Shopify is working on. Hopefully I've seeded some ideas and you have some questions you want to ask. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to turn control back over to Dirceu, and hopefully we can have a great conversation.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Mike. This was super interesting. And I think something to mention as well is that Shopify, besides the huge monolith that we also have hundreds of other Rails applications, and they all benefit from the work that we are building and extracting to make the monolith better. So this is not just the things that we are investing in is not just helpful for the monolith, it's helpful for our smaller Rails apps and to the ecosystem as a whole as well, because a lot of what we do ends up being open sourced or upstreamed to different places. So let's do maybe a quick round of introductions to get people to know who our attendees are. Maybe let's start with Ufuk. Who are you? What do you do at Shopify? And where are you right now?
Sure. I've been at Shopify for about 2.5 years now. I'm a production engineering manager. I lead the Ruby infrastructure team, which works on improving MRI. We work on making improvements and building new features like the one Matt and Peter presented. And I also lead the Ruby types team that Mike mentioned that works on adopting sorbet and building tooling so that the adoption is easier and we get the most benefit from the static typing that we already have in our code base. I live in Cyprus, so I guess like I'm one of the few people on the panel, or maybe half the people on the panel right now are based in Europe. And yeah, so I guess I'll hand it off to the next person.
Jean?
Right, Jean Boussier, I know me as Byroot, so Casper is fine on GitHub. I've joined Shopify in 2013. I'm working on the Rails and Ruby infrastructure team, and I do a lot of different stuff. So I don't know, I end up being a Rails committer. I maintain the Redis RB gem. You may also know me for Bootscale, which later became Bootsnap. That many of you use, I suppose, and many other small things left and right. So it's hard. I don't know where to start. And yeah, like async queries in Active Record recently. So it's just a quick.
Nice, thank you. Chris?
I'm Chris Seaton. I work on Truffle Ruby. I'm based in Cheshire in the UK. I lead a team of 5 juniors and seniors working on Truffle Ruby as an alternative implementation of Ruby. This is long-term, big idea research, and it complements the shorter-term, more immediate stuff that we do on Ruby as well. And it's great to work on a project like this at Shopify where we can try applying it to real code.
Excellent. Matt?
Yep. Hi, my name's Matt. I've been at Shopify for approaching 3 years now. I'm traditionally a Rails developer, but in the last sort of 8 months or so, I've been transitioning into the Ruby infrastructure team where I work on MRI, predominantly on the variable width allocation project that we presented earlier on.
Very cool. All right, thank you. And well, I'm Dirceu. I'm based in Ottawa, Canada, and I'm a engineering manager on the Rails infra team. So I think we can get started with the questions. As a reminder, you can ask questions in the Shopify channel in Discord. I see we have some questions here as well. If you can, please ask them in Discord so we can have a single list. It might make it easier for us to answer all of them. So to get started, Famsi, what are the things Shopify does to handle lots of requests? Like you folks use Puma or Falcon, etc. Something on those lines would be great. Maybe Jean can talk a little bit about scaling.
Sure. So there's kind of two answers. Most of who, like as we said before, we have like a big monolith, and we have also like a galaxy of, I don't like to say micro, just services. New apps just start with Puma, which really definitely is a community standard. Our monolith is still on Unicorn, and that's both the result of legacy, but also deliberate. Sure, we definitely have trouble. Like it would be a lot of work to make sure it's really thread safe. But also Unicorn has a big advantage over Puma, which is its timeout mechanism. Since it's fork-based, you have a hard timeout. Like if your worker for some reason gets stuck because of some bug in like a native gem or whatever, Unicorn will end up issuing like a unique skill to the sub-process, which means like your timeout is really reliable. Whereas Puma cannot do this because if it kills a process, it kills other unrelated thread at the same time. And if it try to use like the timeout library, it just can leave your process in kind of a bad state. So that's like some people would like to migrate from Monolith to Puma. I'm the one who say no usually.
Right.
Hopefully that answers the question. But how do you handle like lots of requests? Like it's not like Puma or Unicorn in terms of performance, not any difference. Yeah, you might see some benchmark where like Puma or Falcon or whatever is like 3 times faster than whatever other HTTP server. The truth is it doesn't matter. The time spent in Unicorn, Puma, or any other thing is going to be like 0.5 or 0.1% of your request time. Everything's going to happen at the Rails layer, so it's going to be like try to make sure your middlewares aren't slow, leverage caching, leverage many. Like it's going to be really an architecture thing, much more than just like it's magical OS, which Unicorn to Puma and suddenly it's faster. It doesn't work that way.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Hopefully that. I'm not sure whether, I think the question was a bit broader than that, but hopefully I answered it.
Yeah, it's about what we do to handle lots of requests, but yeah, that's a very broad topic.
The answer, honestly, the answer is caching.
Right.
But we also shared user data as well, which distributes the load. And we try to offload as much work as we can to background processes, which also takes the load away from the web server.
Something I often say is like scaling is not so much about how fast you can respond, because Rails is a stateless web framework. So you can just horizontally scale it. As long as you have money, you can horizontally add more servers. Your bottleneck is going to be your database system, which traditionally have a hard time scaling horizontally, at least like the SQL ones. And our key, like what really enabled us horizontally scaling our database back in 2000, exactly when I joined, 2013, 2014, was to migrate to like sharding. Back in the day, it was like really, really hard, lots of secret sauce and blue tiers. But now it's baked in, like since Rails 6.1, you have like sharding baked in Rails. So it's hopefully if you run into that problem someday in the future, it's just going to be solved for you already.
Nice. Any other comments about this? All right. Before we move to the next question, hi, Peter. Peter is also joining us for the AMA. Do you want to introduce yourself, talk about what do you do at Shopify?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Peter. I work with Matt on the Ruby infrastructure team. I'm a Ruby core committer, and as you just saw, I work on the variable width allocation project most of my time.
Awesome, thank you. So the next question from Vito. I would love to learn about Shopify's infra and how they scale. Well, I think we touched a bit on that. Any other comments about our infra in general that you folks want to add?
I can just say that we share a lot of information about our infrastructure and some of our design choices at our engineering blog. So shopify.engineering is a great resource to learn more about all of these things.
Great point, thank you. Right, from James Bell. I've been curious about how you're thinking about how to balance the different performance benefits. For example, Truffle Ruby is a very different solution to improving the C-Ruby MRI VM. This is an open question, like a blend of some workloads will work better in one versus the other, or do you have some idea or how to do this? So I guess for what things do we plan on using MRI and for what things do we plan on using Truffle Ruby? Maybe Chris can get started with that.
I think the reason we're looking at multiple different things shows that we're trying out lots of different options, and we're pragmatic about where things will work well. So we try things that are immediately applicable to MRI. So we make changes to MRI, we push those, and those go into production straight away. Those are things that are useful today. We also look at projects which might be useful in the next year or so, like YJIT, because it's based on MRI, so you can simply slot it in and use it. And we also look beyond that on projects like Truffle Ruby. So we build like a runway of ideas and possibilities coming down with a different amount of time until it might be ready, it might be applicable. I don't think Shopify's got a sort of master plan about which is the way to go forward. We're trying things, we're pragmatic about what works out and what's best for us and what might be best for the rest of the ecosystem. So they're all options to use and they're all tools to use. I see Truffle Ruby as being most useful for services which are very long running and need a very quick response rate. It definitely has trade-offs. It has trade-offs in the amount of memory it uses, the amount of time it takes to get going. And sometimes those trade-offs make sense, sometimes they don't. Sometimes we need to rebalance them, but it's just about giving the tools and the ideas and seeing which are most appropriate for each one. I don't think we're trying to say, we'll definitely use it for this, we're all in on this. We're much more pragmatic than that, and we're trying things out.
Excellent. Any other comments about this? Cool. Okay, so the next one is from Femsi. What IDE do people at Shopify use? Is it RubyMine, VS Code, and is there any config that you can share with us? Ufuk?
I can take this probably. So there are lots of IDEs being used by folks at Shopify. We don't dictate a particular IDE, but Visual Studio Code has become the de facto tool, and that's what all the developer acceleration teams build against. So that's the primary IDE that all the internal tooling inside the company support, and that seems to be the de facto one. But we allow people to use other IDEs if they can get it to work. For example, the LSP integration with Sorbet. We have a client that our team supports for Visual Studio Code, but integration is possible with other IDEs like RubyMine or Vim or Emacs. And we try to document that as much as possible, but like at the end of the day, developers are on their own terms if they want to make that work.
Yep, makes sense.
I think everyone in my team uses a different editor, and we all manage to work together in pair, so it's not a huge hurdle.
Ufuk, is there anything that we can share in terms of our configuration or extensions? Are there any plans to share more with the public as a whole?
Sure. So far, we don't actually have any private extensions except for the Sorbet one, which is still not released publicly by Stripe. but you can get access to it if you join the Sorbet Slack channel or the Slack team. They've shared like a zip file of it there, like an early prototype. And that's only private because that's like not publicly available. But all the other things we use, like the standard Ruby extension for working on Ruby, and like all the other extensions we work on are like all the public ones. So I guess I can share like a few extensions, but it won't be any different than the ones people share on blog posts, to be honest.
Sounds good. The Stunning Frost. Oh, this is a tough one. Is Shopify going to organize any larger Ruby conferences in Canada in 2022, maybe? Lack of those conferences made me feel like there's no job market for Ruby in Canada, but it doesn't look true. Yes, it's not true. Anyone can answer about conferences?
I don't think we have any plans to like run our own Ruby conference, right? We fully intend to continue being like sponsors and being closely involved with all the major Ruby and Rails conferences, right? Because we want this to be continue to be a vibrant community. We want it to be a place where people can come to still learn and advance their technical skills, to keep Ruby alive as a language, to keep Rails alive as a web framework. Shopify is hiring like crazy. We have a goal to hire 2,000 engineers worldwide in 2021. And we are about a fifth of the way there. So we're a little behind, but we are hiring like crazy. And if you have Ruby skills and you're interested, please reach out. We have some really great resources on the Shopify website for the open positions we have. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Mike. The next one from Bastian. Any thoughts on how to keep metrics useful while having more async I/O? Most APM services doesn't seem to play nice with having multiple threads or fibers per request. Who wants to take that one?
I'm not. Okay, can you repeat? I'm not sure I grasped the question quite.
Yes.
Quite.
So any thoughts on how to keep metrics useful while having async I/O? And the point is that most APM services don't seem to play nice with multiple threads or fibers per request.
Oh, is it like when you do your monitoring or profiling, like the async I/Os kind of muddies the water? Yeah, to be honest, we don't have that much experience with, like, we want to make it better, but we don't have that much experience with async Ruby in production these days. Like even what's called like active record async queries, basically just like a background thread pool. So it's still very much tied to a request, so it doesn't really muddy the water. But I agree, like asynchronous frameworks like Node.js and things like that are very hard to just figure out what's going on in there. Maybe someone else around here like in the discussion a better answer than I have, but I think that's the best I can do, I'm afraid.
I'm not sure how much it helps for async workloads, but I know that we are working with distributed tracing within the company. I know that gets us like tracing across different processes, but it should also help us trace across different threads and different scheduled tasks in the background, because we can associate them. So distributed tracing seems to be a way forward with that, but I don't think we've actually started using it for this particular thing yet.
Makes sense. Thank you. From Vamsi, since there are a million database hits at any time, how do you handle connections?
The connection to the database?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I seem to understand that the question is like, how do we handle so many connections to the database? Yeah, so like the first thing is that we use MySQL, which has much cheaper connection than Postgres. It's mostly for historical reasons. It's just when you're heavily invested in MySQL, like before anyone asks, it's because Shopify was started like 16 years ago. If it was started now, maybe it would start with Postgres, I don't know. But the question never really asked itself. So first, all servers can handle much more requests than you might think. And then we have something called proxy SQL. I don't even remember where it comes from. Maybe Twitter, maybe Facebook. I'm not really a database person. So you basically just, it's a bit like PG Bouncer. You just hide your databases behind proxies. So you can do like a grab of like, I don't know, 1,000 process connecting to one proxy and that one proxy to the real database. So you just divided your number of connections to the database by 1,000 and you just can scale this horizontally. The added advantage is that this proxy is a bit smart, like you can make it a bit smart. So you can like rewrite queries in emergency. You can do a whole lot of things. So it's not just for scaling connection, it also like improve many things. And we also like heavily looking into, like it's not just now, but we look into something called Vitesse, which is move like the sharding logic from the application to a similar proxy. So it's gonna have like the same effect of just decentralizing, I guess, or like delegating connections. So you can do like a, I don't know, describe it like kind of a tree of connections. So at the end, your database doesn't see that many clients. Hopefully that answers.
Thank you. Kuras, on which version of Rails are you currently?
I can answer. It changes every Monday. So every Monday I get an automated pull request with which point us to like the latest Rails main. Sometimes we find a bug or two. So either it's a bug on our side and we fix it, or either it's a bug on Rails side and we fix it in Rails. And then we merge it. So whatever was the head on Monday is whatever version of Rails we're running right now.
John, the follow-up question is, which commit? Can you give us the shot?
Don't give the shot.
No, okay.
No, I want to make another point here, which is that Shopify spends a lot of time and energy trying to stay up to date on both Ruby and Rails, right? So we're running bleeding edge 7.0 alpha Rails. We are running Ruby 3.0 wherever we can. And Jean is one of the people inside Shopify who will backport things to our internal version of Ruby from master if there are things that are useful to us, like performance or bug fixes. So we're running as close to bleeding edge as is responsible. And we spend quite a bit of effort to do that, so that we're always expending a little bit of effort, and that avoids these big bang upgrades that end up being really challenging for a lot of folks. And I think that has paid off over time.
Yeah, and I'll add, we do, not in production, but we cannot do the same with Ruby. So we maintain our main monolith. We run a nightly CI against Ruby head, just to whenever there's a big change in Ruby, we just know it right away and we can take measures. We can even just open a discussion with upstream and say are you sure you want to do this? Blah, blah, blah. Or even catch bugs and just report them, if not fix them. So awesome. It's just back when I joined, one of the first projects I worked on was upgrading our monolith to Rails 4. And we were a couple of years behind, and it was really, really painful. So ever since, I think it's in 5.2, we started tracking edge. We don't want to do this anymore. We just do piecemeals.
I think some historical context is in order. We never talked about it in this AMA, but Shopify as a product started on a Rails version that was pre 1.0, when the code was still being passed around as zip files over email. And it's been upgraded to every version of Rails, and now it's just living on the bleeding edge.
Yeah, if you want to know more about how this whole process worked until we got to the edge, there is a YouTube talk by Rafael França talking about the most painful upgrades until we actually got to the process where we are right now.
There's an interesting follow-up question in the Zoom chat that I wanted to just poke at, which is, what's the point of using alpha Rails in production? If you use Rails 6x, would you lose something? It's not necessarily about what we get from running on Rails 7.0 alpha. This is Shopify investing in Rails and trying to harden Rails for the benefit of the Rails community, right? We want to make sure we're running the latest, so that if there's a problem, we find it early. We find it before there's a Rails release. And the fact that we have quite a few Rails contributors and Rails core members on our team is really helpful, right? Shopify is able to also like direct the evolution of Rails in a way that we wouldn't otherwise be able to. So it's really it's a symbiotic relationship. It's not necessarily what we get out of it. It's also what we're trying to give back to the community by running that in production.
Great. Okay. Let's assume you have a chance to rewrite or add a feature to any gem. Which one it will be and why? That's an interesting question. Who wants to start?
Was willing to say no Kogir. No.
I don't know, because I mean, usually when I want to add a feature to a gem, I just open a pull request.
Nice.
It's not like, oh no, I could never just do it. And even when upstream doesn't want it, usually you can just do another gem but just add the thing. So I'm really, I don't know to answer this. I'm sorry.
That's an excellent answer, actually. Like we should all feel comfortable just trying things out and proposing things and creating pull requests. Any other thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I guess be the change you want to see.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Nice. Have you looked at Ruby and also Rails on ARM, such as Graviton?
So we do have people trying out Ruby on the new ARM MacBooks, for example, because that we use Mac as our development platform. My understanding is most of Rails and Ruby just works fine on ARM processors. For those which are JIT, such as Java Ruby and YJIT, there's extra work to do to make it compatible with ARM, of course. But I was pretty surprised because there are some pretty fundamental differences between ARM and Intel processors in relation to native code about memory ordering and things like that. But it seems to be pretty much okay. But I guess you're asking about ARM instances in the cloud. We're not experimenting with that yet, but yeah, it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, to add to this, it's mostly because we're on Google Cloud, which, as far as I know, doesn't have ARM instances yet, but probably will have in a year, maybe 2. So I'm sure it's not really our team that's going to work on this for sure, but I'm very certain that if it leads, someone will experiment with it as soon as it's available, and if it leads to some or money or whatever improvements, that's going to be a thing. Like we're not. But the advantage of the cloud, we can get rid of all or Intel servers in a couple of comments. But yeah, and we start to have developers on Apple M1, so we can experiment with it in development, even though it doesn't change anything. Yep. But it's going to be a challenging project though, because we'll have to handle like Docker images for like both versions, and it's going to be some people will pull their hair, I think.
Cool. How's your Rails monolith modularization or deconstruction going? Interesting question. Mike?
I guess maybe I'll take this one. So you know, the last big news we had around our work around modularization or componentization in our monolith was the release of Pacwork late last year. Pacwork again is it's a gem that helps us track where component boundaries are, what the dependencies are between those components when component A calls into component B. Is it using the public interface, or is it using something considered private? And how do we track those exceptions so that we understand coupling and cohesion? Okay, so we built this tool. It is in use in our code base, and I think what we're maybe I'll be like vulnerable to the world here for a moment. When we have 3,000 engineers in a code base, it's often really hard to make substantive changes, right? Like this is like, it's essentially, it's boiling the ocean, right? We've got 3 million lines of code. We've got 3,000 engineers. Simply making those tools available isn't going to magically change things overnight. And so what we're discovering now as a team is there is a really long tail of complexity in the code base and design anti-patterns, even like code deprecations, things that Rails does now that it didn't used to do that are still sitting in our code base, that we are working towards trying to just burn down that long tail of complexity in the code base to try to make some of those component boundaries a little easier to see, a little more discernible, and to teach engineers along the way, what does good component design look like? What is, how do we, what's a good way to think about this when you're building something new? How should you design it? But even more so when you're looking at existing code, how do you refactor that like an engineering professional and make it better than it was when you arrived? Again, we're going to be releasing Upgrow soon, which has some opinions here, but that's really only useful for new code bases. And so I think what we're really struggling with is how do we really make the code base better over time? And where that time period is going to be years, we have to be patient with ourselves. And so like, where are we on the modularization? I'll give you the same answer I give to my boss, which is like, this is a really hard problem. It's a systemic problem with how development teams ship features and how they're incentivized. And like, we're trying to be very, very thoughtful about it. And we're trying to just take baby steps every day to get better and leave the code base in a better place than it was before. So that's the real answer. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. There's a follow-up about Pacwork. Would you recommend other companies use this gem when modularizing a monolith, or is it very Shopify specific?
It is not Shopify specific. So in particular, there is a wonderful team at Gusto who has picked up Pacwork and is really investing in it and trying to use it there. Stefan Hagemann is even writing a book about componentization. So many years ago, he wrote a book about componentized Rails. I forget what the exact title was. And this book is going to essentially be the sequel. Hey, 10 years later, where's component design inside Rails? And he's going to be featuring Pacwork as one of the tools that he recommends teams use. And he's got some great material in there about the spectrum of isolation versus high degrees of coupling, and how do you just manage that code base over its lifetime. So I would definitely say Pacwork is worth looking at if this is something that's on your mind and that you think would help your teams become more aware of those component interfaces.
Excellent, thank you. Makes a lot of sense.
And I think his book is going to be published later this year. I think it's set to be published this fall.
Which basic knowledge skills do you expect a developer to have in order to be accepted at Shopify as a developer? Ooh, who wants to take that one?
I can take a stab at it from a different angle. So the knowledge is really dependent on the role that we're trying to hire for. So that's going to change based on the role. And right now we're mostly hiring for more senior roles. But in general, we hire people who care about constant learning and constant growth. We try to hire people that try to make an impact everywhere they go and that thrive on change and that want to build things for the long term. So those are our values. And we look for those values in the people that we try to hire more than looking at if they already know Ruby or already know Rails. Actually, as a matter of fact, we hire a lot of people that are completely new to Ruby and Rails, even though those are the main languages and frameworks we use at Shopify. So it's not so much like what you know, but it's so much about how you approach things and what kind of things you've done before and what kind of growth mindset you have. But I think all the talent people in the Shopify channel would give much better context as to what specific things talent is looking for when they're doing hiring. So I advise everyone to go talk to them or book a time in Brella with the team to talk over some opportunities.
Awesome, thank you. Just to reiterate, I joined Shopify 2 years ago, coming from a Node.js company. So I didn't use Rails before really, and here I am. So it's not a requirement. There's no super specific requirements unless you're applying for a very specific role, like Ufuk mentioned. Any other comments on this? Okay, so what error reporting service does Shopify use? is it still Bugsnag, or have you already built something in-house for it?
We're still on Bugsnag. It works. We don't it's not. I mean, I don't want to badmouth any of our providers, but no, it works. Ultimately, it works. I guess the only custom thing is that we proxy, not quite proxy it, but we sample it because otherwise, when you have like pen testers or whatever, it can like kind of overwhelm them. But no, Bugsnag works. It works at our scale. None of the alternatives really have any killer features that would really justify moving. I know some companies like GitHub have their own in-house thing. It's kind of, I've been like since years, a bit of a dream of mine of like just doing something similar to be able to have like a very smart tool based on like all in-house assumptions. But it's also a lot of work. And we have this tendency at Shopify of like, if there's some like tool that you can just buy and it solves your problem, don't go like reinventing the wheel. And I don't think any of the benefit we could have from like an in-house tool would justify like the amount of work to first build it and then maintain it. Like it would be like at our scale, it would be like multiple people watching over it all day long. So I don't think it's justified.
Yeah, and the fact that Bugsnag works at our scale is a good selling point for them, actually. There's a follow-up question for this. Do you find the traffic infrastructure that Shopify has causes issues on error reporting? You mentioned sampling.
Yeah, it's just like when you receive so much, it's the same when you do like any kind of monitoring or whatever. Like the kind of like a 1 in a million scenario when you work at like a regular, like a run-of-the-mill scale, you never see it. When you run with the numbers Mike showed before, it happens every second. So you can only record like one exception in 1,000, and you're just not gonna miss any. That's basically the idea. So at some point, there's no point sending every single data point to your like error recording or monitoring service. You can just take a sample of what's happening in production, and it's going to give you statistically, it's going to give you a good picture, and it's just going to cost less. So that's the idea.
Yeah. Other comments about this one? No. Cool. What are the roles and responsibilities of mid or junior level dev look like when they join Shopify? How do you mentor, nurture junior developers in your team? Are they expected to sort of contribute to Rails and Ruby? Interesting question. Once you start with that.
So I'm assuming it's like the Ruby and Rails infrastructure team. I'm trying to remember like yeah, I mean, we had interns, so we even had like some kind of internal interns, like people working on product teams doing like some kind of 3 or 6 months with us. And like Gannon, for instance, Gannon McGibbons, you may have heard, ended up a Rails committer in just like 6 months of joining our team and then going back on product or something else. I don't quite remember. So yes, someone joining our team, like it doesn't, like if you join a product team at Shopify, you're not expected to be able to go debug deep into like Rails guts. But if you join the Rails infrastructure team, yes. We even have, right now we have what we call internally like a dev degree intern. So it's people following like an actual courses directly tied to Shopify. I don't know the exact specific, but I think it's like half university, half working as an intern. It's Adriana. I don't know if she's listening to us, and she's doing great. I don't know how many Rails PA she has, but she knows it like really well. So I don't think we would expect someone to do it like right off the start, but like the expectation is you learn it in like, not necessarily real quick, but you're interested to learn it and are capable of doing it at some point.
I think Shopify does mentoring and bringing people up to speed really, really well. We've got formal mentoring, so you can formally request a mentor, and I've mentored up, down, sideways, but also mentoring is just a day-to-day part of what we do. And if you join a team like ours, certainly we do a lot of pairing, we do a lot of training people up on different parts of the stack. And one of the best things about Shopify is if you're working with Ruby, you literally can't get stuck with Ruby at Shopify, right? So you've got your peers, but you can also escalate all the way up until you're asking someone who probably wrote that bit of code about what's going on in Ruby and why. And you can always reach out to those people informally. There's no like process to do it, and just say, hi, I'm stuck on this. So you can't get stuck working with Ruby. You can't get to some point where your knowledge or your ability to learn runs out. And especially in my team, we've taken, for example, a high school intern, so someone who hadn't been to college yet. And by the end of her internship, she was writing top of Hacker News blog posts about compiler internals. And that's the kind of level you can go with Shopify, and that's the kind of support you can get to enable you to do that sort of thing. So I think the mentoring and learning at Shopify really is excellent and is unique within Ruby.
Also, not to put him on the spot, but Peter was an intern with us for 3 times before he turned full-time. So maybe he can share some of his experiences if he wants.
Yeah, so I was actually an intern this time last year on the team. And it was my absolutely first time working on Ruby internals. It's a pretty large code base, and it's written in C. It's pretty difficult to understand. But the fact that there's so many people on the team that know so much about how the code base works helps a lot. And we often do like pairing sessions, and that kind of thing really helps with learning, because you can see what the experienced people are doing when they're writing code. And I think that's helped me get up to speed really, really fast. And like it was kind of a surprise to me that I got accepted as a Ruby core committer just about 2 months ago. And so it really astonishes me how fast I was able to get up to speed and start actually committing things into Ruby that are very meaningful features.
That's awesome. Oh, okay. This is a question that is very easy to answer with "it depends," but how do you handle tech debt?
Yeah, it depends. It varies a lot. Like typically, like I'm gonna just walk with my experience. The kind of tech debt I deal with usually is Rails just deprecated an API, and we have like thousands of call sites using it. So we have a gem called Deprecation Toolkit that help us, like, since there is way too much places where we use it, we cannot do just like one big commit that would just like change everything at once. We would end up in like, that's also working at scale is also working with lots of developers. So you cannot do big bang changes at once. Otherwise you're constantly having Git conflicts and things like that. So we have this gem that allow us to record all the places where deprecation happen, and then we can grind them down in like small increments, things like that. So at least in that area, it's just like sweat. You just work on it. When it's like architectural design, like that's really gonna depend on teams. As Mike was saying before, like there's no, I mean, as soon as you pass like a trivial size of a code base, you'll always find some tech debt, and it's really a matter of just not getting overwhelmed. And I don't think there's any magic. It's just you need to really attack it as like a process, and when you need to, and be selective. Like there's no point spending 3 months cleaning up something that it's just going to be removed in 2 years or whatever. You have to be smart and pick your battles. Like it's like having an argument. You shouldn't have like every single argument you could. You have to pick your battles.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, I think we should give a call out to the team that's responsible for being stewards of our core monolith, the core stewardship team that just deal with all the technical that we've achieved that aren't related to the product necessarily, but mostly to the architecture. Like they're responsible for optimizing the cross-cutting concerns. And yeah, so that we have a whole team that's responsible for paying off some of the tech that we've acquired over the years.
And this is super important, but it is also very specific to core. In other teams at Shopify working in other code bases, it really depends on the team and how they want to work. So I don't think there's a unified answer for Shopify as a whole.
Yeah, but very much a decentralized responsibility.
Mm-hmm. So. How is remote work going? Big change for the company?
That's a funny one because I think, Dirceu, except for you and maybe Peter, everyone on this panel had always been remote at Shopify.
Yep.
So for our team, we've always been distributed on the Ruby and Rails infrastructure team with people working like Jean from France or Chris and Matt from the UK, me from Cyprus, and we had a team member from Poland. For example, Aaron is working from Seattle. We have another team member who's working from Japan. So for our team that's used to working in a distributed manner, it hasn't been that much of a change. We were actually thriving. But there are some product teams for which it has been harder, obviously. But as a general, the company is totally on board with remote work going forward. And we believe that that's the right way because we think the hybrid approach is worse than being in the offices or being fully remote. It's the worst of both worlds. So we want to go fully remote instead of doing the worst thing. And everyone seems to be on board with it.
Yeah, and it's important to mention that remote working is a skill that you can learn and get better at. And there's a lot of resources inside Shopify for people that weren't working remote before to get better at that and to understand the trade-offs, to understand the benefits and so on. So yeah, it is a big change for Shopify, but I think we are doing well. Other comments about this? Cool. Okay, not a question, but to add about Pacwork as a non-Shopify employee. We use it where I work, a company called Free Agent, having started componentization a couple of months before Pacwork was released. Our app is similarly old to Shopify, in our case, only 14 years old, nice, and is on the larger size. Since Pacwork uses existing patterns in the form of Rails engines, we haven't had to bend our app in unexpected ways. TLDR, try it, it might work. So nice. Thank you for the comment. This is good reassurance. What does the interview process for Shopify look like? Does it involve lots of whiteboarding like FAANG companies do? It doesn't. Ufuk.
So I think we talk a little bit more about our interview process on our career site. So shopify.com/careers is the site where people can get more information. But we have something that we call a life story interview, where we try to get to know the candidate and what they've done before coming to the interview. And like I said before, we're looking for the skills in the person rather than their or existing technical skills. So that's a big indicator for us. We try to see what they're passionate about, how they solve problems, how they approach difficult situations through their life story interview. But then we also have coding challenges. We sit down and do pair programming with them. And this is an actual pair programming for the candidate. The candidate can choose any language they want, they feel comfortable in. They're given an example problem, and we try to solve it with them, really pairing. They get to ask questions. They can access any resources they want online or on their computer. They can come with their computer. Well, it's remote now, so they will be on their computer anyway. And our interview process is definitely not whiteboard based. It's like the most close to the real thing that you would be doing when you join Shopify. And we're really trying to filter for the qualities of the candidate rather than their specific skill set.
And a follow-up to that, maybe, is a CS degree important for you?
No, I think like Chris mentioned, we had like one high school student that did amazing things, and there have been like a number of people who hadn't are just like high school graduates that have like great impact at Shopify over the years. So like not even a university degree is required. Again, we look for the qualities in the person rather than any particular degrees or CS degrees or PhDs or whatever. Me, myself, I don't have a CS degree, for example, and that wasn't any kind of obstacle.
Nice. I just want to point out that we are in the last 5 minutes. So if you have more questions, or if your question, if we couldn't reach your question here, please keep asking on Discord, and we'll be sure to answer that throughout the conference. So taking another one, not a specific question, but just wanted someone from the development team to comment on what is the feeling when Shopify has gone from Rails using e-commerce store to a major contributor to the ecosystem. The story is very interesting on how roles have changed from user to contributor and how Shopify gives back to the community. Also, it's a testament to Rails and Ruby being alive and well. That's an excellent comment. Does anyone want to add to that?
Just if you can read the follow-up to that, just on the thing below, I think that answers a little bit the question there. Someone answered in the Discord chat saying, as far as I know, the founder Toby has been a very active contributor from early on. So that was like actually from the beginning, Toby was contributing a lot and heavily to Rails, even at the beginning. So I think that was in our DNA for like forever. But we obviously grew that over the time.
Yeah, and as if I may add, like I don't think there's such thing as a contributor and user. When you use an open source project, like at the very least, you're gonna run into a bug or something at some point, and you might like maybe not even do a proper bug report, but just like post it on a forum or whatever, and you're just gonna contribute to just like the community and everything. So I mean, we didn't wait to have like committer access to Rails. Toby had them at first, but then like he became CEO like of a bigger company, so he just exited. So at some point we had no Rails core contributors. But same, like we didn't have Ruby core committers a few years back, but we were still sending patches and everything. I don't think there was like we became contributors. We've always been. Maybe we're more active contributors now, but it's the beauty of open source, right? You use it, but you can contribute in many ways, even simple ones.
Perfect. Yes. And now for maybe our last question. Let's see. You all do okay, this actually is related to the one that we're talking about. You all do a lot of open source work. Internally, do you have training processes or practices that you provide to folks who are engaging with open source projects for the first time? I think that, yeah, I think mostly that touches on what you were talking about, John, that there is not really a clear divide, right? We kind of expect people to contribute to different code bases, be them open source or not.
Yeah, I mean, all teams are very much focused on various open source projects. So I'm doing like, I think like half the code I write is in the open, in various gems and whatever. But even, you know, like even in like a very product focused team or whatever, or at Shopify was working on, I don't know, like checkout or whatever, it's very frequent for them to just find a bug in Rails. Often they come to us for like just know if it's really a bug or whatever, but we very often encourage it to like just fix them themselves if they want to. They're very often gonna like fix bugs in other various gems, and I don't think we have any particular. I mean, I don't know if it's still in the hiring thing, but like when I joined 7-8 years ago, in the hiring guidelines, there was like, don't hire assholes. So normally, if we still respect that, like there's no reason it goes bad when you interact with an open source community as a Shopify employee. So I don't remember any kind of incident. If anything, like the worst incident with an open source community is probably me a long time ago when I interacted with Aaron Patterson, and my English was quite bad at the time, and he proposed something, and I said, "Oh, I think this is a terrible idea," and I didn't quite realize how strong of a statement it was. It's probably the worst incident ever.
Nice. People do want more support, though. I think we've got a Slack room where there are people who are involved in open source. So if you're not sure how to interact with open source, not something done before, there's a specific place to go and ask for help with it. So there's support available.
Yeah. And there's a lot of leading by example within our team specifically. So people like Jean and Raphael and Aaron are huge figures in the community, and they have a lot of open source contributions and a lot of experience that they bring with them. And they do a lot of leading by example for the rest of the team. And that matters a lot. You know, we talked about mentorship before. That matters a lot about our specific team's growth, and then that percolates to the broader Shopify community as well.
Nice, excellent. Well, we are at time, so thank you everyone for answering questions and talking about your experience at Shopify and with Rails at Scale. And thank you for all the attendees that asked questions as well. Like I said before, if you have other questions or if we didn't get to your question, please just ask in the Shopify channel in Discord. And yeah, thank you very much.